Hey, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. As you know, we are the Word Center. We believe in education. We believe in educating everyone who come in the sphere of our influence. And one of the things that we try to bring you spiritual guidance, but we also believe in existential needs. On last week, we had physician's assistants, Eric Linwar, and we had Dr. Justin Turner join us. But tonight I have a very special guest where we'll be talking about something a little bit different. Today, I have Dr. Tiffany Anderson. Dr. Tiffany Anderson is a graduate of Mississippi College, where she earned a doctorate degree in professional counseling. So she's not just a YouTube person or someone who has simply looked up a few facts. She is degreed and she's certified. She also attended Jackson State University, DI Love, where she earned her master's degree in counseling as well as a bachelor's degree in psychology. Dr. Anderson is a licensed professional counselor, national certified counselor, and holds the credential of licensed clinical mental health and therapist with the Mississippi Department of Mental Health. She is a state certified law enforcement officer, instructor through the Mississippi Board of Law Enforcement Officer Standards and Training. She's active in training law enforcement officers throughout the community on mental health illness and how to improve responses to citizens in mental health crisis. Dr. Anderson Washington is currently employed with the Hines Behavioral Health Services in Jackson, Mississippi as the agency's coordinator for mobile crisis response and serves as the Hines County Crisis Intervention Team, CIT program coordinator. She is trained and certified in crisis intervention. She is the owner and operator of Miracle Counseling Services, LLC, as well as Dr. Tiffany Speaks Consulting. We'll have that contact information up a little bit later so that for those of you who would like to utilize her services, sometimes you simply need to talk to someone, and we'll deal with that in a minute. So we're so glad to have Dr. Anderson Washington with us on tonight. So if you would like to speak to everybody.
Hello, good evening, and thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you taking the time out to invite me to speak on this very, very important matter tonight. So I'm looking forward to having a great dialogue and getting some folks educated out here today.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us. If you're kicking it with me in the comments, this is what I need you to do. I need you to start a watch party. I need you to invite somebody, share it on your timeline, call your auntie them, your mama them, call your cousin them, call everybody and tell them they need to jump on so that they can get the information. Because it is vital information. We believe in giving you great information in a time where so much false information is given and shared from invalid sources. So we have someone who is well qualified to speak on this particular topic, and we are extremely excited to have her, and we thank her on behalf of the Word Center, on behalf of myself, as well as my wife, Lady Tyrunda Richardson. Let's go ahead and get started. We often spend a lot of money on gym memberships, cosmetics, nutritionists, etc., to improve our physical bodies. We spend a lot of time on trying to get cut and get ripped and lose the belly fat and the love handles and all of that stuff. We mostly focus on our outer extremities. Is there an underemphasis on mental health, especially in our communities? If so, why?
Well, let me first say that, I am not against working out, not against nutritionists, not against buying cosmetics. After all, those things are often beneficial to one's self-esteem, to one's self-care, to one's mental health sometimes. So, there is absolutely nothing wrong with those things. I do believe, however, that there has been a shift. Now, while we're not where we want to be, we are not where we once were when it came to the stigma and the shame that attaches itself along with having a dialogue and having a conversation about mental illness. So while those things are, there's nothing wrong with those things, I do think that we're at a point now in our community where we can say the word mental illness. We can say the word mental health without it being a hush-hush word, without it being something that we can't talk about. I do several trainings, and those trainings are always packed with people who want to learn more. They want to know more. They want to educate themselves. So that to me represents a shift in our community, that our community is more open to having a dialogue and talking about these things, which for me is, in my opinion, is progress from where we once were, where we could not discuss those things. So, I would say to anyone who uses, gym memberships and uses those things to help increase their self-esteem or help part of self-care, if that's working for you, keep doing that. But let's also not forget to continue to, we owe it to ourselves and our community to remain educated on the issues related to mental health in our community.
Great, great, great. So do you believe that there's an underemphasis, especially in the African American community, when it comes to treating mental health or getting help for mental issues?
I do. I was just watching Soul Food with my husband last night, and many of us have seen that movie. And you remember the scene with Uncle Pete. And you remember, if you remember Uncle Pete, they kept Uncle Pete in the back room. And
Right.
so no one really knew what was going on with Uncle Pete. And so it's kind of, when I think about mental health in our community, in the African American community, I think about that term, what happens in this house stays in this house, that kind of term. I also think about it in terms of, that's our culture. Part of our culture is to be strong and to be able to handle things independent of outside sources, getting people inside of our business, as they would say. And when we talk about the stigma of mental illness in the African American community, there's a sense of weakness that comes along with seeking out mental health treatment. It's seen for some reason as though that's a strike against us, or that it makes you weak, or there's some type of character flaw. But in addition to that, I think the disparity is that there's not a lot of trust between the African American community and mental health professionals. While this is changing, you don't see a whole lot of mental health professionals in the African American community. Now that is changing and that is growing, but once upon a time that was not the case. And so I do think that there are some differences in the ways that we as African Americans seek out mental health services, and there are some reasons why we don't readily seek treatment the way maybe some other cultures do.
Wow, wow, wow. Well said. Thank you so much for that. So, based on what you just said, sometimes we have the propensity to not patronize mental health professionals because there are not many mental health professionals that look like us.
That look like us.
Wow.
That's absolutely correct. Yes.
So there may be somebody listening who may be a college student who may want to pursue a field in a career in mental health. What you're saying is that really the field is not saturated. So that'll be a great opportunity to maybe major in something that would place you in that particular.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Great. What are some contributing factors? And then we're going to get into the crisis, because of course we're not going to avoid that. The Word Center, we definitely like to speak about the elephants in the room. So we'll deal with the crisis during the pandemic. But just basically speaking, what are some contributing factors to poor mental health?
Well, there's still the research is still ongoing when it comes to a single factor that relates to someone developing a mental health condition. And right now, there is no one single causal factor that will say that somebody will have a mental health condition or a mental illness. Now, there are some risk factors that will put a person at higher risk of developing a mental illness. One of the number one contributing factors is genetics. If your parent, if your grandparent, if there is a history of mental illness in your family, it doesn't mean that you will develop a mental illness. It just means that your risk of developing a mental illness is increased. Also, trauma, especially untreated childhood trauma. As 90% of us, according to research, have experienced some type of trauma before the age of 18. Well, all of us have experienced trauma. This does not necessarily mean that you are going to develop a mental health condition or a mental illness later. It just means that your chances of developing one are increased. Substance use. substance abuse. People don't realize that, but substance abuse or substance use disorders are also part of what we call co-occurring disorders, because we usually don't see one without the other. If we're treating someone for a substance use disorder, chances are they have depression, they have bipolar disorder, which we'll get into that. They have some type of anxiety disorder, and they may be trying to self-treat or self-medicate themselves with that. So, again, there we have that whole nature versus nurture, but the environment that you live in coming up, your coping skills, your support systems, it can be a recipe for disaster, or it could be a recipe for someone that comes out healthy. So, keep in mind that when people say, well, this causes mental illness is not caused by bad parenting. I've heard things like that. There is one thing that people don't know, is that when a woman is pregnant, for example, this is one of the reasons why the first trimester of the pregnancy is so important, because if there's any type of infection that gets into the brain of the fetus during that time, it can result in delayed brain functioning or mental health conditions later on in life. Also, the brain is not done developing until we're 23, 24, 25 years old. So when we talk about students who are using substance and they don't know what this is, you are, or they may be, contributing to a long-term mental health condition simply by engaging in substances that are changing the brain chemistry and causing them to experience symptoms that they may not be able to get rid of later on or long term.
When you say trauma, I think when people hear that word, they think, something that's super major.
Yeah.
But when we say trauma, it can be defined as something as a result of a divorce,
Yes.
loss of a child, maybe,
Yes.
a premature delivery, loss of a job. Maybe you just
Yes.
bought the house and lost the job.
Right. Trauma can be anything that hijacks your brain, or anything that puts your brain, and I say brain because there are biochemical things that go on in a person's brain in response to trauma. Trauma can change the entire makeup of a person's brain. So if anything that hijacks the brain, that puts that person in a position where they are, they may feel frozen, their fight or flight reflexes are constantly on, that can be a trauma. A robbery can be a trauma. A death in the family, if not coped with, that can be a trauma. Watching someone be hurt, or watching someone be abused, or watching someone be killed, that can all be trauma. So we tend to think about trauma in law enforcement and military, which they do have high rates of trauma, but trauma can also be sexual trauma. It could be, physical abuse can result in trauma. So when we think about trauma, it's really more broad than what we like to tend to talk about for the most part.
Right. I just did a series on grief, and a borderline definition of grief is anytime something is taken away from you, you have the
Mhm.
propensity to grieve. And
Right.
so right now, even with what's going on, we have millions of people who are grieving because their
Yeah.
schedules change and their
Yes.
routines change. And so we have people who are grieving, and when grief is not properly dealt with, it comes out in erroneous ways, through substance abuse and
Mhm.
through other mechanisms that may be unhealthy and unfit. Whatnot. Thank you so much for that. Work, family, and business can be physically taxing.
Mhm.
These tasks or duties are many times interwoven into the fabric of our everyday life. How can a person properly balance mental health with physical responsibility?
The word that comes to mind is a word that you just said: balance. It's all about balance. So many times in our society, work tends to supersede family life, or there's always something that we place above something else. And so having a healthy balance of all the core elements, or all the core dimensions of life, is something that's going to be really, really important when it comes to creating that balance. Also, having healthy boundaries. Sometimes we have to learn to say no. to things. We have to learn to get our priorities in line and decide what is important to us, and then make decisions based on what those priorities are. And sometimes that may involve saying no. Um, there is Stephen Covey, and when he talks about 7 habits of highly effective people, one thing that he talks about is the circle of concern and the circle of influence. And so in the circle of concern, those are all those things, or the circle of influence rather, all those things that in the bigger circle that you can't do anything about. They're there, but you can't change them. However, that circle in the middle, if you were to pull that up, that's the area where we have some influence. We can do something about those things. And so it's really important for us to focus on those things which we do have control over, and less on those things that we know that we can do absolutely nothing about. And that's going to help us to contribute to some of that balance that we have to have as we go through life, because life is going to continue whether we stop or not. Life is going to continue to go on. So we have to find healthy ways to create balance in every aspect of our life.
All right, there are two things that you mentioned. I love to give people resources as people are watching, and those of you who are kicking in with me in the context, have y'all shared that yet? Y'all haven't shared it yet. I need y'all to share that. Share this video. But there are two good books that came to mind. One is by Richard Swenson called Margin. And basically the whole premise of that book is to make sure that you have enough margin in your life so that you won't get out of balance. For example, if you want to have margin in your finances, you want to have enough finances so if something happened, some type of major calamity or some type of major event happened, that you will have enough in your saving, enough margin in your savings to be able to take care of it. So if the wash machine break down or you need a tire in your car, if you have $5,000 in your account, that's margin you have that won't put you in a hole and cause you to have to get a loan or anything like that. And so we want to create margin in our mental health as well. We want to always have enough room to be able to because if we're just completely balanced, if I have $0 in my bank account, that's completely balanced. If something happens, that means I'm going into the negative. And so the whole premise of that book by Richard Swenson is to have margin in every area of your life, including your finances, your mental health, your relationships, etc. And another thing that you mentioned was balance. I want to give you a resource there. There's a book called Boundaries, which I believe in, by Dr. Henry Cloud and John Townsend. They're clinical psychologists who actually wrote this particular book to the church, and it caught wildfire, and it just caught fire across the world, and millions of people began to read it. So those are two great resources for those of you who need to learn how to set up healthy boundaries. They have books about setting up healthy boundaries with your spouse, about setting up healthy boundaries with your kids, and even your teenagers. Just Google that. Like people are always Googling stuff, so make sure you Google that, and you can
Google University.
yes, and so people can find that. Okay, well, let's keep on going. Right now, let's deal with the elephant in the room. Right now, we're in a crisis, and of course, it's a global pandemic. We're in a crisis. Can a crisis like what we're going through affect someone's mental health? If so, how?
It absolutely can. Right now, what I am seeing and what we are seeing, what therapists are seeing across just everywhere, is a heightened level of anxiety. Now, if you think about someone who was prior to this, who was otherwise, mentally healthy, mentally stable, the anxiety is there. But if you consider someone who already had a pre-existing condition of anxiety, or they already had some type of phobia, this has now exacerbated their symptoms. So what we're seeing now is high rates of anxiety in a lot of clients that we see. We're also seeing some elevated rates of depression because people are losing their jobs. People have been laid off. We're also seeing some increase or some questionable behaviors in the home with children who are home with their parents all day. Now, when a child goes to school, we don't necessarily know what goes on in their home, but being that they're home all day, we don't know what the coping skills of the parents are. There's been some questionable, possible abuse cases, which we talked about earlier, trauma, and that not solved can also lead to mental health conditions later. So again, we're seeing high rates of anxiety, high rates of depression, people feeling hopeless, feeling helpless, like when is this going to end? And so people are looking for hope right now. People are looking for something to hold on to give them hope, and to kind of to hang in there. People are really getting fearful. They're scared, they're afraid, and all of these different emotions, if they don't know what to do with these, they or how to affect them, or how to express them in an effective or therapeutic way, then it can definitely negatively impact their mental health. Yes, absolutely.
Wow, wow. So if I have all of these emotions, range of emotions, anxiety, depression, etc., and if I don't
Hmm.
know what to do with it, and if I don't have a healthy outlet, what could happen to me if
Right.
I have no outlet to of all of these bottled up emotions? What could
Yeah.
happen?
Yeah. Emotions don't die. I don't care what anybody says. Emotions, they don't just die. Emotions are energy. They have to go somewhere. And so sometimes what happens is that people will try to numb the emotions, and they may try to use substance so that they can feel better, so that they can stop the feeling or stop thinking. It may come out as snapping at your partner or snapping at your children. Some people may internalize some of these feelings, and they may become depressed. So it's going to seep out in one direction or the other, which is why it's so important for us to recognize it, manage it, reach out for help. That it is so okay to reach out for help. As I mentioned to you earlier in our conversation, how it's more acceptable. It seems like there's a shift. We can talk about this stuff now. And so it's totally okay to reach out for help. It's totally okay to allow yourself to be examined by someone who can't see with the eyes that you're seeing, and maybe even normalize some of this stuff, because these are normal responses to abnormal situations. So I think when we think about it in terms of, this is a normal response, but this situation is not normal. And so we have to figure out what to do with that.
Right. And what I'm seeing people negatively apply some of these emotions in the form of posting things that they don't normally post. And so they're
Mhm.
messing up their brands, they're damaging their
Yes,
businesses, damaging their names.
yes.
And you can see the pathology in a post.
Hmm.
You can see that, hold on, this person does not normally, act in such a way. And so we're
Yeah.
seeing a lot of that where people are now venting on Facebook, and whereas journaling are good things. If you have thoughts that you can't get out, I
Hmm.
teach that people need to journal
Right.
so that you can actually get some of this stuff out. I also teach that we also need an expansion block. I like to talk about that Mississippi heat. It gets
Yeah.
110 degrees here in Mississippi, and the reason why we have slits in the concrete is because when it gets hot in this Mississippi heat, concrete has a tendency to buckle. So they put expansion blocks or slits in the concrete
Okay.
so that
That's what that is.
it can have somewhere to expand. Because if
Okay.
it has
Okay.
nowhere to expand, it buckles under the extreme pressure.
Well, I'm learning something from you today, because I had no idea that that's what that
Yes,
was.
ma'am.
But
Yes,
you are absolutely right, and I highly recommend journaling. There is something therapeutic. Again, I believe that everything is energy, and so if you have that energy in your brain, something therapeutic about transferring that energy from your brain to that pen onto that paper. That's a way to kind of help you collect your thoughts, get back in touch with what you're thinking, and organize your thoughts. And if you go back and read some of the things that you wrote, you may find that you may have just been in a heightened moment of anxiety, and what you were really afraid of is not really as bad as what you think it is, or what you thought it was.
wow, good, just good information. Now I kind of want to cross over into the sociological, as a former sociology professor, the social factor mixing with the psychological factor. We've been hearing all of these terms. Many of them are new terms like social distancing, quarantine, and these are words that we need to retire immediately after this. I'm so sick of hearing about social distancing and quarantine and isolation. But
Yes.
these terms have been promulgated through mass media, and they have become really a part of our everyday lives. These are things that we we're seeing every day. I mean, I ran into a senator today and I almost went to shake his hand, and then we elbow bumped and said social distancing, so it's kind of, part of our everyday life. Do you believe, in your honest estimation, that there will be an impact on our mental health as we attempt to re-assimilate into a sense of normalcy? Or do you believe that we'll forever be changed as a result of some of the things we're having to endure?
You know, right now is a really tough time for a lot of people. And I do not believe that there is one person on this earth living through this who will not be impacted in some way related to this crisis that we're in. Now, whether it's a negative impact or whether it's a positive impact is the question, because it's almost on a spectrum. It could go both ways. This may cause us to be more cautious about covering our sneezes, washing our hands, making sure, just the other day I was getting ready to bite my nail and I was like, oh, nope, can't do that. So it made me more cautious about that. But it can also send us into being even more anxious than what we already are. So the pendulum, it can swing both ways. I don't feel like that we're going to just get away from here unscathed where nobody will be impacted. I cannot say that everyone's mental health is going to suffer because of this, because there is a such thing as blooming in a situation like this. There's a such thing as a post-traumatic growth is what they call it. And so that is what happens there, is that the person may have a traumatic experience, or they may experience something really, really, terrible, such as this, but it promotes in them this drive to do better, this drive to grow, this drive to adapt, this drive to evolve. And so the outcome of that is what you get from the negative events. So it really depends on that person's coping skills, on that person's support system, the story that the person is telling themselves regarding this. All of that is going to make a huge difference in what the outcome of their personal mental health is going to be.
Wow. I believe it's going to be an adjustment. I believe
It
that even
is.
this summer, when we go on vacations, I believe people will have the propensity to not fly because they don't want to be in an enclosed spot. I think that
Yeah.
large gatherings right now will kind of be on pause because, we're kind of thinking about the larger crowds. And even yesterday, as I went into a restroom, and before I went into the restroom, I heard a cough. And as the guy was coming out of the restroom, this complete stranger, I turned to him and said, "Did you just cough in there?" He was like, "No, it
Yeah.
wasn't me, and it was somebody else in the stall." But it's just, I turned this complete stranger and said, "Did you just cough up in there?" Because I was going to wait and I was going to turn around. Had he said, "Yeah, that was me who coughed in there," it used to be kind of cultural to say "bless you" when somebody sneezed. Now when somebody sneezes, like,
It's looking
"You
like,
okay?
right.
You going
Yeah.
on with that?"
Yeah, it's gonna be an adjustment. It is definitely going to be an adjustment. But we have this is an opportunity to figure out how we want to adjust. It doesn't have to be a negative adjustment. There can be some growth in this as well.
I love it. I love it. Let's continue. People are going through a dramatic event right now, or dramatic events right now, because there are a series of negative circumstances that are hitting households right now, from financial to emotional to psychological to spiritual, because people are angry they can't go to church. So there's a conflation of issues right now, even as we speak. People are not allowed to see their loved ones who may have tested positive for COVID, only allowed to maybe FaceTime. And then there are people who have died. They're not even allowed to have a traditional funeral because it's a
Right.
gathering. And so people are afraid to to memorialize their loved ones in a traditional way.
Mhm.
With that said, what are some suggestions to deal with traumatic events that we all may face at some point in time? I mean, we're going to have some traumatic events. Somebody's going to die in our family. Some people are going to get divorced. Some kids are going to do some crazy stuff that they didn't
Yeah.
teach them. What are some basic suggestions that if traumatic events happen in my life, what do I need to do that's not negative, that's positive, that's not sinful? Come on, we got to deal with the church part. What can we do?
Right, right. So, I do not want to make light of this situation. This is a very, very serious situation. People are dying. People are losing their jobs. People are having all type of, different traumatic things happening right now. And it is serious. But one of the things that I would recommend first and foremost is remember to have self-compassion. So many times we forget that we are people, we are human. You mentioned about grief earlier. For some reason, and it happens so much in my field, that we don't want people to know that we are human. We don't want people to know that we have areas that we are struggling with. We want to have the cover of our lives to look as though it is intact, while inside the innermost parts of us are slowly dying. And so, in order to get a grip on that, I think it's really important for us to have self-compassion with ourselves, allow ourselves to grieve when these things happen. If it gets to the point where it is really starting to take over that person's life, we call that like a pervasive type of thing. It's bothering you in every domain. Reach out for help, ask for services, because that is one of the things that we do want to make sure that we know, that our community knows, that is available, that you have people who want to be there for you. My agency is not closed down. My business is not closed down. Now, we may have to wear a face mask when we meet. However, we are there to serve the people. The other thing that I like to recommend is when you mentioned about traditional funerals that they don't have. This may be an opportunity for us to recreate our own traditions and how we like to memorialize, or how we like to remember our loved ones. It may not have to be what grandmama and granddaddy and them did when they had a funeral. They may have to, I know some weddings had gotten canceled. This may be the perfect opportunity to reinvest in our own creative ways to, for example, have a wedding, or have a funeral, or have a memorial for someone. And I would definitely recommend for individuals to take advantage of the alternative platforms, because there is telehealth that is available. There is telemedicine that is available. For a long time, there was a pushback with getting involved with technology, but here is where we are now. Right now, we're at a point where that is an option for someone who can't get to the doctor, for someone who may be fearful about going to see a therapist. They can see a therapist online. So take advantage of those alternative platforms. Use this as an opportunity to recreate and restructure our own ways of handling things, and reach out for help when we see that there's going to be a problem.
This is an important question or whatnot, and like I said, it's not a long answer to it, but many people are under the impression that I got to have a lot of money to see a psychiatrist or a psychologist or LPC or whatnot. Do you guys take insurance? Will my insurance pay for this?
Right, right. We do take insurance. Now, at Miracle Counseling Services, which is my agency, we do insurance. We also do private pay. Now, as you mentioned earlier, I also work at Hines Behavioral Health Services. Now, with that, there is a sliding fee scale, meaning that if you are a resident of Hines County, then you can see a licensed provider at that center, and you would pay $25. And if you don't have the $25, what they typically do is they will work with you. So our goal at the agency is to not turn anybody away. Now, if you're looking, however, for a private practitioner, a private practice such as myself, then we do insurance, and we also do private pay.
Could you explain for somebody out here who don't know what telehealth is, and is it something that you're able to utilize even in with your private practice?
Yes. So telehealth is an online, it's a HIPAA compliant database where a person can see their therapist, see their doctor, see their primary care provider face to face, similar to what we're doing now, except for it's online. And so they would log into a secure site. There would be a couple of questions that, of course, will be asked just to ensure that we're talking to the right person, of course, being able to view the person. But it keeps that person from having to make a trip. to the doctor's office. They can talk to that person right here over the internet, get prescriptions written and called in, and they can do all of this within the comfort of their own home, not even having to leave.
I love it. I love it. So did y'all hear that? If you have any type of health insurance, sometimes you may have a minor deductible or something like that, but we can utilize our health insurance to help deal with our mental health. And so that's important to know, just in case you need to see someone, or maybe you don't want to go out the house and maybe you want to utilize the services of Dr. Tiff. She can actually see you through telehealth. You don't have to
Yes.
come out the house, for those of you right now who really want to stay in the house and listen to our government officials to really stay at home. So that's just good information to know, that you don't always have to come out of your pocket.
Right.
Your insurance, your health insurance, can cover those things. Okay.
Right.
All right.
Absolutely.
Well, next question, as we get ready to come to a close. People right now, they're hyper consuming information at rates that we haven't seen in history. We're inundated with news, information, constant negative news regarding the global pandemic, the deaths, the cases of infection, all of this stuff. People are camped on social media to the point where some countries have even throttled their internet. Netflix has had to throttle their internet in Asian countries because people are hyper consuming all of this information. Are there dangers and long-term effects in mass consuming so much information at one time?
There definitely can be dangers. We are right now being inundated with so much information. You have some people, however, who can watch that stuff all day long and feel like they're not affected. And then you have others like myself. There's only so much of that I can take in. So what I would recommend here is really knowing yourself. If you know that you are really sensitive to this type of information and just being inundated with so much information that it's going to overstimulate you, I would limit some of that. So me personally, I have a limit to how much I'm going to watch. I believe that it's totally okay to watch for education purposes. You want to know what's going on. But when you find yourself watching so much of this that it now starts to interfere with your family time, it now starts to increase and heighten your anxiety levels. You are now always on guard. That is a sign that you may need to cut back. Too much of anything, that would tell me, I may need to watch how much of this stuff I'm letting to come in, because as humans, we naturally tend to kind of consume those things, and we want to know what's going on, but we don't realize that we can be overstimulating ourselves and not even know it. We can
Over.
be watching so much TV that we forget that our child needs help with homework, or we could be so, anxious about what we just heard that we don't sleep. So we have to be mindful of the subtle impact of watching such long term, especially when it's negative for the most part.
Oh yeah, some people are, we're just passionate about everything that we do, and so you're watching TV. I remember my grandmother used to watch Young and the Restless, and she talking to Victor Newman through the TV. No, don't do it. She's evil. So we can get into the point where we hear a press conference or we hear something extremely dumb, and we're just like
Right.
But so we have to be careful. So what are some suggestions as it relates to breaking? What are some things that we can do other than consuming this information?
Yeah, being that everyone, or for at least a lot of people, are at home, this is a perfect time. I think that there's an opportunity in every dark cloud, that there's something to be gleaned in every negative situation. And here is what I'm seeing, is that here is an opportunity to reconvene with family. Because, I remember when I was younger, when, families ate dinner together, and families talked and families had conversation. But if you walk into a modern living room today, you're going to see a child on a computer. You see the wife on the laptop, the husband is on the iPad. Everybody is so consumed with electronics. Nobody's talking anymore. Nobody knows what's going on. So this is a perfect opportunity. That break away from the TV would be a perfect opportunity to go ahead and reunite with your family, to start having family dinners again. I've been seeing so many dances, and I told my daughter I was going to do one with her later. But so many of the dances that the moms and the grandmothers are doing with their families, I love seeing that, because what I'm seeing now is that it's like a family reunion. We're being reunited. We are being forced to reunite with our families. And so I think that this is a perfect opportunity to do that. This is a perfect opportunity to do some spring cleaning. I also think this is a perfect opportunity for those who live alone to do some self-reflection, because it's so busy in our minds, so busy in our heads. When you turn that TV off and stop for a second and ask yourself, where am I with this? Am I dealing with the emotions that I too feel related to this? So there's opportunities, there are lessons here that we can all glean from. It's just a matter of taking advantage of them.
That's good. That is so good. That is so good. I want to add a couple of things. Maybe there's a book that you want to read, a project that you want to finish. Go out and get some. I've been seeing kids ride bikes.
Yeah.
You know,
Hadn't seen that in a while. We hadn't seen kids riding bikes in so long.
I saw somebody playing backgammon. Was it badminton or whatever it is in the driveway?
Yeah.
And I hadn't seen a badminton set in 20 years. And I'm like, wow, I didn't know it still existed. And so there's so many good opportunities that actually, like you said, can come from this. Even though, like I say, it's a bad situation. I want to kind of throw something on you. There are some leaders who are listening right now. There are some other clinicians who are listening right now. Doctors, healthcare providers, they're pastors, they're ministers, people who supervise, who lead in their respective arenas. What do you suggest that as people who pour into other people, how important it is to keep their mental health intact?
Oh, wow. There is so much that I could say about that. Especially, I mentioned earlier that many times in our profession, we don't want people to know that we're human. We don't want people to know that we struggle. We don't want people to know that we have some of the same problems. We may be one breakdown away of being, in one of our clients' shoes. And so I think that that's very humbling. It humbles me as a clinician when I think about that. Now, most of us, licensed professionals, doctors, we have a code of ethics. And part of our code of ethics says that we are mandated to take care of ourselves. So if for no other reason, our code of ethics says that in order for you to maintain in this profession, you must take care of yourself. You must maintain self-care. So self-care is very deliberate for me, for clinicians, that should be in general. We cannot pour from an empty cup. So if we are not all the way there, if we are not full, then what are we going to pour into others? Being empty can cause distractions during counseling sessions. Being empty can cause you to miss something significant of what the client said to you or what the consumer said to you that may, make or break the entire rapport of the relationship. So I think that comes back into play with that self-compassion for us as clinicians, realizing that we are human, that we are not robots, that we are here to help other people. But if we cannot take care of ourselves, then we are not going to be able to help anybody else effectively or at optimal levels.
That's so good. I introduced a term to my church a couple of years ago, especially for those who are clinicians who actually take on information from other people, pastors, counselors, healthcare providers, et cetera, called rinsing. And from a psychiatrist perspective is that if you're a person who actually live in the basement of other people's secrets and problems, that there's something that you have to do called rinsing. You got to be able to get this stuff off you. And that's in a positive manner, and that doesn't always happen. People don't always rinse correctly. Jesus got a way to rinse. He would constantly deal with people's problems on a consistent basis, and the Bible says, and he went to the mountains to pray. And so as clinicians, as leaders, we have to find positive outlets to be able to get this stuff out off us. And one of the terms that I've learned or come to know is rinsing. And so we have to find
Mm-hmm.
positive ways to rinse.
Right.
It's kind of like, I'm hearing doctors right now, and even my wife, who is a nurse practitioner at the VA, when she comes home, she has to take her clothes off
Yeah.
because the toxicity from the environment she was just
Mm-hmm.
in could contaminate us
Yes.
at home. And
Yes.
so what I find many times is that many clinicians are contaminating those in the sphere of their influence because they're not properly rinsing. They're not
Mm-hmm.
properly getting off all of the information and all of the toxicity that
Yeah.
happens in their environment. Police
Right.
officers, service
Yes.
workers, they're
Yes.
not properly rinsing. And so one of the things that we want to suggest to those of you listening that just shared this, because I know you just
Mm-hmm.
shared it, right? But for the people who are listening, that make sure that, you rinse, especially if you have to live in the basements of other people's secrets and problems.
Right. Because there is a such thing as vicarious trauma. You listening to other people's, problems all day, it's almost like expecting to get in the water and not get wet. So you have to find creative ways. One of the things that I do, when I drive home, I may have to drive home in silence. I may have to drive home and just and physically or mentally envision myself leaving that stuff at the office. And so you have to be really deliberate about that, because taking it home, what we talked about balance earlier, taking it home is going to knock off the balance that you're trying to sustain within your work home relationship.
And that is so vital, because what happens mentally can actually translate physically. There's a
It
term
can.
also called projection. Something
Mhm.
bad happens at work, you come home and kick the
You
cat.
kick the dog, right? You
You
kick the
see, so
dog.
you're projecting what happens psychologically in one arena, and you're physically transferring it. So
Yeah.
that's just good stuff. Good stuff. And then one more question, which I believe is the $1,000,000 question,
Mhm.
and it's something that I've had to deal with as a pastor, and it's still kind of left unanswered. Let's say somebody out there that you have a spouse,
Mhm.
especially a family member, someone close to you that has exemplified signs of mental decay,
Yeah.
mental instability. How do I communicate to them, you need some help, without offending them? Or
Right.
what is
Right.
the proper way to do that?
Right, right. It's all going to, and let me give this disclaimer. There are going to be some people that no matter how you say it or what you say, are not going to be receptive to your concern. And I want you to remember this term, anexignosia. What that is that, and don't ask me how to spell it because I couldn't tell you right now. But what this is not a denial of the disease. This is where a part of their brain really does not believe that they have a mental illness. And you see this in more severe types of mental health conditions, but you also see it in Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease. But when you're dealing with someone and you're seeing signs, the way that you present to them is going to be most beneficial. We have a model in mental health first aid that we call algae. And so it kind of gives you a roadmap of how to help someone who you think may be having a mental health crisis, or they may be showing signs and symptoms. The first thing you want to do is you want to assess. You want to kind of watch, is this person a danger of hurting themselves or hurting someone else? Now, even though that's a legal term, you still want to find out, is there a danger involved?
Mhm.
Generally, if it's not a danger, that's kind of going to lower the playing field a little bit, to where we'll have to kind of see what happens. But the next one is most important, which is going to be listen. You want to listen non-judgmentally. Now, we have a problem sometimes listening non-judgmentally. We can listen, but if you're listening with judgment, you're not going to be able to help that person. So you really want to listen non-judgmentally. You may also, the next one is going to be G. Give them reassurance that I'm here for you. I am concerned about you. And help them to know that what you're seeing, that this is not uncommon for maybe certain types of mental health conditions that you've seen or that you've been trained on. Or if you take the mental health first aid class, you'll know that. When you do your E, you want to encourage appropriate professional help. So you can't say, well, I'm gonna call the state hospital and put you in Whitfield. That's not gonna work. You want to be really gentle, you want to be compassionate, and encourage appropriate professional help. And finally, the last one is that you want to encourage appropriate self-help for them to see is there something that they can do to maybe help themselves, depending on the nature and the severity of the mental illness. But keep in mind, it is not against the law to be mentally ill. So just because you have someone who may have odd thoughts, we have people who have odd thoughts who are walking this earth, they go to work every day. The issue is going to be how much impairment are those odd thoughts causing? So if you're having some concerns about someone who you feel like may have a mental health condition, you want to go through algae, you want to listen non-judgmentally, offer your support, encourage professional help, but also encourage other self-help resources for them to use in their community.
My pastor coined the term functional dysfunctional. So it's
Mm-hmm.
possible that people, like you said, are working every day and maybe struggling with bipolar disorder or schizophrenia
Right.
or manic depression and things of that nature. Have you seen that in your profession?
Yes, I have, and again, what we look for is, can this person go to work? Can you go to work with these beliefs and sustain, and the serious mental illness of schizophrenia. Sometimes they hear schizophrenia and they think, monster, this person. But I have clients who do have schizophrenia. However, they're functional. They recognize their triggers. They take their medication. They know what they hear, they may hear something and say, this is a symptom of my disease. I recognize that. Now, all people with schizophrenia are not like that, but there's this misconception that because you have schizophrenia, that for some reason, you can't work or you can't carry out a quality of life. And I'm not sure if you all have ever seen that movie, A Beautiful Mind, with,
Yes.
what is his name? Russ, what is his name? It's slipping my mind right about now.
I don't know his name, but I know
Can't think of his name.
but it's a great movie.
But it's a great movie for anyone who has not seen that movie, and it's a true story. So I definitely see that. I know that there is recovery. People who are mentally ill, who have mental illness, recovery is possible. So it is not something to where, you have it and you have to be like Uncle Pete, how we talked about earlier in Soul Food. It's not that kind of party anymore in this day and age.
So with that said, you said something, and I'm probably going to do a series on it called triggers. What are triggers?
Mm-hmm. Triggers are they can be internal or they can be external. Anything that occurs that kind of flips the light switch on for that person to have them react. A trigger could be a smell. For example, someone who has sexual trauma. A while back, there was an individual who she remembered that while she was being sexually abused, Sanford and Son was playing in the background. So as an adult, whenever she heard the theme song of Sanford and Son, that was a trigger for her because it brought her back to the moment where she was being sexually assaulted. So a trigger is going to be anything that's going to hijack your brain over again and bring you back into a place where you were experiencing that trauma. Again, it could be a smell, it could be a sound, it could be the smell of someone's cologne, fish frying in the kitchen. Triggers are very personal and they're very individualized based on that person's experience.
Yeah, I like to talk about it from a relational perspective. That many times, if we haven't identified our triggers, because you talked about that earlier, about a person can be functional, dysfunctional, but they've identified their triggers. But
Right.
we have to identify our triggers in relationships, because if not, what'll happen is, something will happen and it will trigger a person, and they will begin to associate the new person with the old
With the
relationship.
old person,
And,
yes.
and it could be a behavior, it could be something that's said, it could be voice intonation. I know people who, if you raise their voice because they were yelled at as kids, if you raise your voice at them, it takes them back. They regress.
Yes.
It takes them back to a place that was extremely negative, that was extremely dark, the sunken place. And it takes them back there, and you'll think that they're lashing out at you, but what happened is you've actually triggered something in them that either they may or may not know that's in them.
Absolutely. You're absolutely correct.
Well, this has been excellent. Great information. Great information. Look, somebody's out there. We got people who are watching right now. They're sharing across the net. How can we what's the name of your company? How can they contact you?
Okay. Well, the name of my company is Miracle Counseling Services, LLC. I can be reached at 601-316-8881. I also have a page, Miracle Counseling Services, on Facebook. So go ahead and follow that link for me. Go ahead and hit that like button. I am going to start taking new clients within the next 30 days. So please feel free to go ahead and let's start getting your appointment scheduled now. Telehealth will be available. So if you do not want to leave your home, you will have the option to see me via telehealth.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Great information. We appreciate you. Like I say, on behalf of my wife, Lady Tyranda Richardson, on behalf of the Word Center family, we appreciate you educating us and enlightening us, especially during a time of crisis where we believe mental health is wealth. And so thank you so much for joining us. God bless
Thank
you.
you.
And
Thank you.
hopefully, like I say, if we can utilize your services in any way or be any help that will benefit you, feel free to call us. God bless you and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.